When did the ground first begin to shift beneath my feet? That question, a relentless interrogator, has haunted the hollow chambers of my mind since the world as I knew it fractured. It's a fool's errand, perhaps, to pinpoint a single seismic event. More likely, it was a series of infinitesimal tremors, microfractures in the bedrock of our shared existence, so subtle at first that I dismissed them as the natural settling of a decade-long marriage. Clara and I had navigated nearly 10 years. We'd weathered storms, celebrated triumphs, built a life I believed was fortified against any serious assault. I thought our foundations were granite, our bond a titanium alloy. Now, looking back through the smoke and rubble of what became, I see how naively I'd underestimated the corrosive power of deceit. Lately, or perhaps not so lately, perhaps for a year, or even more, if I'm brutally honest with myself, a chilling premonition had begun to coil around my daily life. It was the feeling of being an unwelcome guest in my own home, an outsider peering through a distorted lens at a life that was recognizably mine, yet alienatingly different. I was becoming a spectator to a slow, agonizing demolition, watching Clara, my Clara, metamorphose into a stranger who wore her face like a beautifully crafted, terrifyingly empty mask. It began, as these insidious things often do, with a subtlety that disarmed suspicion. Clara, always a whirlwind of ambition in her high-powered marketing career, developed a sudden surge of new work commitments. Strategy sessions that bled into the unforgiving hours of the early morning, client dinners that materialized with alarming frequency and even more alarming opacity. Initially, I tamped down the flicker of unease. Her industry was a carnivorous beast, I reasoned. Deadlines were her daily bread, networking her lifeblood. She was climbing, and I was supposed to be her supportive partner, the unwavering anchor in her ambitious ascent. But the pattern, once established, became a cruel, mocking rhythm, a drumbeat against the thinning walls of my denial. Every Wednesday and Friday, almost without fail, the text would arrive, usually around 5:30 p.m., just as I was beginning to wonder about dinner. A terse, almost perfunctory message, running late. Team drinks, /strategy session. Don't wait up. The variations were minimal, the sentiment identical. I wanted to believe her. God, how I clung to that desire, that desperate need for her words to be true. But they felt hollow, brittle, like a line delivered from a script she'd memorized but no longer felt, a performance she was almost daring me to call out. There was a flatness to the digital words, a lack of the usual warmth or playful exasperation that had once colored her messages about work. I remember one particular Wednesday. I'd cooked her favorite, osso buco, a labor of love that simmered for hours, filling the apartment with its rich, comforting aroma. I'd even bought a bottle of the Barolo she adored. At 5:37 p.m., the familiar chime of her text. Late one. Client emergency. Grab something for yourself. No apology, no ETA. Just a directive. I ate alone that night, the osso buco tasting like ash in my mouth, the expensive one a bitter mockery. I'd tried calling her earlier, around 7 p.m., just to see if she wanted me to save her a plate. It went straight to voicemail, her professional, slightly detached greeting a stark reminder of the chasm that was opening between us. When she finally drifted in, sometime after midnight, smelling faintly of expensive perfume that wasn't her usual Chanel No. 5 and something else, something sharp and unfamiliar, like a man's cologne, she'd merely pecked my cheek, murmured about a nightmare client, and disappeared into the bathroom for an unusually long shower. I'd lain in bed, feigning sleep, listening to the hiss of the water, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. It wasn't just the lateness, it was the way she was late. The lack of detail, the cursory explanations, the almost defiant air of someone who felt entitled to her secrets. Then came the more overt, almost brazen transformation, a period I now think of as Clara's calculated unveiling. She, who had always possessed an innate, understated elegance, began to cultivate a look that felt sharper, more aggressive, almost predatory. It was as if she were shedding an old skin and revealing something sleeker, more dangerous underneath. New clothes began to appear in her wardrobe with startling regularity, not the classic, tailored pieces she'd always favored, but figure-hugging dresses in bold, almost confrontational colors, vertiginous heels that seemed to change her very posture, making her taller, more imposing. Her makeup became more pronounced, a bolder slash of crimson lipstick, a more dramatic sweep of eyeliner that made her eyes seem colder, more appraising. And the lingerie. That was a particularly cruel twist of the knife. Exquisite, expensive pieces of silk and lace, in shades of midnight blue and blood red, would occasionally be glimpsed carelessly tossed on the bed or peeking from a laundry basket. But they were never for me. There were no seductive unveilings, no playful hints. Their presence felt like a deliberate provocation, a silent, contemptuous message that her sensuality was being directed elsewhere, that I was no longer a player in that particular game. I remember stumbling upon a receipt from a high-end lingerie boutique tucked into the pocket of a new trench coat, a coat I hadn't seen her wear yet. The total was eye-watering. Later that week, she'd mentioned a necessary business trip to Milan for a global marketing summit. The dates on the receipt coincided with the week before her supposed trip. When I'd casually asked her about the new coat, saying it looked lovely, she'd merely shrugged. "Oh, this old thing? Picked it up ages ago." A small lie, easily delivered, but it landed like a shard of glass in my gut. When I dared to voice my observations, couched as gently as I could manage, "You seem to be experimenting with your style lately, Clara." "It's very striking." Her laughter was sharp, brittle, and laced with a condescension that made me flinch. "Just feeling myself, Liam," she'd purred, her eyes scanning me with an unnerving detachment. "A woman needs to keep things interesting, don't you think?" For herself, primarily. The implication hung heavy in the air. "And you, Liam, are decidedly uninteresting." "Harmless," she insisted, if I pressed further. "It's called self-care, Liam. You should try it sometime." But harmless and self-care didn't explain the sudden, icy wall that had erected itself between us in the bedroom, a tundra of unspoken resentments and physical avoidance. It didn't explain why the interest she was cultivating felt so pointedly designed to exclude, even humiliate me. The last time she'd looked at me with genuine desire, with that spark of intimacy that had once defined us, felt like a distant, half-forgotten dream. Now, her touch, when it occurred at all, was perfunctory, almost clinical. A peck on the cheek that felt more like a dismissal than an affection. The physical distance was a tangible ache, a constant reminder of what we were losing, or what, perhaps, I had already lost. We'd always been a tactile couple. Casual touches, a hand on the small of my back as we passed in the hallway, her legs intertwined with mine on the sofa as we watched a film, the comforting weight of her head on my shoulder. These small intimacies, the unspoken language of our connection, had withered and died, replaced by a careful, almost studied avoidance of contact. If I reached for her hand, she'd find a reason to pull away. Her phone would conveniently ring, or she'd suddenly remember something she needed to do in another room. One Saturday morning, a time we'd once reserved for lazy mornings in bed, filled with coffee and whispered conversations, I woke to find her side of the bed already cold. I found her in the kitchen, dressed in sleek athletic where I didn't recognize, her AirPods already in. "Morning," she'd said, her voice bright, almost unnaturally so. "Off to a new Pilates class. It's an intensive, all-morning thing. Don't wait for me for brunch." And just like that, another shared ritual was erased, replaced by a new, solitary pursuit I knew nothing about. The casual ease with which she jettisoned our traditions was, in itself, a profound betrayal. The chasm between us wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a gaping maw of contempt and indifference that seemed to widen with each passing day. Our cherished rituals, the small, sacred acts that had formed the bedrock of our shared intimacy, were systematically dismantled, one by one, with a chilling efficiency. Sunday mornings, once a haven of languid hours spent entangled in sheets, reading newspapers, and debating politics or art over endless cups of coffee, became a landscape of separate activities. She'd rise early, her movements brisk and purposeful, heading out for a run or to that mysterious Pilates class, leaving me alone in the quiet expanse of our bed, the silence amplifying my growing sense of unease. The quiet dinners, where we'd dissect our days, share frustrations, and dream about the future, devolved into strained, perfunctory affairs. More often than not, she claimed to be too tired to cook or even to engage in meaningful conversation. We'd eat in near silence, the clinking of cutlery the loudest sound in the room, or she'd pick at her food, her attention glued to her phone, a faint, secretive smile playing on her lips as she scrolled or typed. I recall one evening trying to initiate a conversation about a promotion I was up for at work, something that would have once elicited her enthusiastic support and insightful advice. She'd listened with a distracted air, her eyes flicking repeatedly to her phone, which lay face down on the table between us like a coiled serpent. That's nice, Liam, she'd said finally, her tone devoid of genuine interest. Then, before I could elaborate, her phone buzzed, and she snatched it up. Sorry, work emergency, she'd murmured, already engrossed in the screen, effectively ending the conversation. The work emergency seemed to involve a rapid exchange of texts that brought that same secretive, almost smug smile to her face. Her excuses became weapons, each one carefully chosen to inflict maximum emotional damage. I'm exhausted, Liam, she'd sigh, if I suggested an evening out or even a quiet night in together. This new campaign is killing me. The subtext was clear. My life is demanding and important. Yours is not. If I tried to bridge the emotional distance, to express my feelings of loneliness or concern, she'd deflect with practiced ease. I just need space, Liam. Can't you understand that? You're being so needy lately. Or, the ultimate indictment, delivered with a sigh of feigned exasperation. Maybe if you made more of an effort to be exciting, Liam, things would be different. The unspoken accusation in that last remark, asterisk, this is your fault. You were the reason for my unhappiness, my distance asterisk, was a poison dart that always found its mark. It was a masterful stroke of psychological manipulation, designed to shift the blame, to make me the architect of our marital decay. And for a while, I confess, it worked. I questioned myself relentlessly. Was I boring? Had I become complacent? Did I not appreciate her enough? I tried harder, suggesting new restaurants, planning weekend getaways, which were invariably canceled due to her work, buying her thoughtful little gifts that were received with polite indifference. Each attempt to reconnect was met with a fresh wave of her carefully cultivated detachment, leaving me feeling more inadequate, more desperate. The easy camaraderie, the shared jokes, the comfortable silences that had once defined our life together, were replaced by a tense, brittle atmosphere. The air in our apartment grew thick with unspoken resentments, with the ghosts of what used to be. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, constantly monitoring her moods, terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing, of triggering another bout of icy disdain or dismissive contempt. It was the casual cruelty that cut the deepest. A dismissive wave of her hand when I tried to share an anecdote from my day. The way her eyes would glaze over if I spoke for more than a few minutes about something that mattered to me. The almost imperceptible sneer that would touch her lips if I expressed an opinion that differed from her increasingly cynical worldview. She was erasing me, piece by piece, from the landscape of her life, and she was doing it with a chilling, deliberate precision. I am not, by nature, a man who allows a malignant wound to fester unattended. I believe in lancing the boil, in confronting the infection head-on, no matter how painful the process. And so, one evening, after weeks of escalating tension and a particularly brutal day where Clara had treated me with a level of dismissive contempt that bordered on outright hostility, I decided I could bear the suffocating silence no longer. She was in our chic, minimalist living room, a space that increasingly felt like a stage set for a play I hadn't auditioned for, idly flipping through a fashion magazine, a glass of expensive wine at her elbow. The silence was a physical presence, a suffocating shroud that pressed down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. I took a deep breath, marshaling my courage, and walked in. Clara, I began, my voice tighter, more strained than I intended. We need to talk. Seriously talk. She looked up, her expression a carefully constructed mask of mild surprise, a hint of impatience flickering in her eyes. As if I were an unwelcome interruption to her carefully curated evening. Talk about what, Liam? She asked, her tone light, almost bored. If it's about the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, I've already called the plumber. It's not about the damned faucet, Clara. I snapped, the frustration I'd been suppressing for months finally breaking through. It's about us. What the hell is going on with us? She arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, setting the magazine aside with a sigh that was pure theater. Oh, here we go, she murmured, as if bracing herself for a tedious, oft-repeated argument. What melodrama are you concocting now, Liam? This isn't melodrama. My voice was rising, betraying the raw pain and anger churning inside me. I fought to regain control, to articulate the litany of grievances that had been poisoning our marriage. It's your late nights, Clara. Every damn week. It's the way you look through me, like I'm a piece of furniture. It's the fact that we don't touch anymore. We don't talk. We don't connect. It's like living with a beautiful, binglungde Moashungrun. I listed the changes, my voice trembling with a pain she seemed utterly immune to. Her flagrant secrecy, the calculated withdrawal of affection, the way she seemed to derive a perverse pleasure from my discomfort. I spoke of my loneliness, my confusion, my fear that we were irrevocably broken. She listened, or pretended to listen, her expression unreadable, her wine glass held delicately in her perfectly manicured fingers. When I finally ran out of words, exhausted and emotionally raw, she didn't respond immediately. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, her eyes fixed on me with a chilling, appraising look. Then she spoke, her voice dripping with a condescension that was more cutting than any shout. "You're being paranoid, Liam." "Absurdly so." She gave a small, dismissive laugh, a sound that scraped against my exposed nerves. "Late nights? I have a demanding career, something you used to admire, or at least pretend to. Or have you forgotten what it takes to succeed in this city? As for not connecting," she continued, her tone shifting to one of feigned sympathy, the kind one might use with a particularly dull child, "perhaps you should look inward. Marriage is a two-way street, Liam. I'm not a mind reader. If you're unhappy, perhaps you should consider what you might be doing, or not doing, to contribute to that." She didn't just dismiss my concerns, she expertly, cruelly, turned them back on me. "Honestly, Liam," she said, her voice now laced with a weary impatience, "you're becoming rather insecure in your old age. All these accusations, this clinging, it's not attractive." Her tone was light, almost playful, as if she were gently chiding a foolish pet, but her eyes were cold, reptilian, devoid of any warmth or empathy. I wanted to scream, to shatter her icy composure, to see a flicker of the woman I'd married, the woman I still, foolishly, loved. But her self-possession was impenetrable. She had an answer for everything, a carefully constructed justification that painted me as the unreasonable one, the source of all our problems. I felt my anger dissipating, replaced by a sickening wave of despair. It was like punching a block of ice. I only ended up bruising myself. "So that's it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm just paranoid, insecure. It's all in my head." "Essentially," she said, picking up her magazine again, a clear dismissal. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Liam, I'd like to relax. It's been a very long week." I stood there for a moment, defeated. The unspoken accusations, the years of shared history, the dying embers of our love, all swirling around me in a toxic miasma. Then, I turned and walked away, the weight of her indifference a crushing burden. That night, I didn't just feel like a spectator to my own execution. I felt like I was already a ghost, haunting the periphery of a life that no longer included me. And the chilling certainty began to dawn. She wasn't just drifting away. She was actively, deliberately pushing me out. The only question left was why. And who, or what, was pulling her in another direction. The failed confrontation was a watershed moment. It didn't clear the air. It poisoned it further, thickening the atmosphere in our once shared home with an almost tangible miasma of resentment and unspoken accusations. Clara's dismissal of my pain, her casual cruelty in twisting my genuine concerns into evidence of my own inadequacy, was a brutal awakening. It was no longer possible to delude myself that this was a phase, a temporary disconnect that could be bridged with patience and understanding. This was a deliberate, systematic campaign of alienation, and I was its target. A chilling certainty began to crystallize in my mind. She wanted out. But why the charade? Why the elaborate dance of late nights and feigned work commitments? Why not simply be honest, however painful that honesty might be? The only answer that presented itself, ugly and insidious, was that there was someone else. Someone she was protecting, someone whose existence necessitated this elaborate web of deceit. That's when I truly began to watch. Not just observe, but scrutinize. Her every move, every word, every fleeting expression became a data point in my desperate, agonizing quest for truth. I became a ghost in my own life, a silent, unseen audience to her increasingly brazen performances. Her phone, once a mere communication device, became an object of intense fascination and dread. It was her constant companion, clutched in her hand like a talisman, its screen angled away from me with a practiced, almost unconscious gesture. The frequency of her texting escalated, often accompanied by that faint, secretive smile that now felt like a deliberate taunt. I'd catch snippets of her hushed, hurried phone calls, taken on the balcony or in the supposed privacy of our bedroom with the door pointedly closed. Words like, later, can't talk now, and of course, you know I do, would drift through the door, each one a tiny, poison dart. I started noticing patterns I'd previously dismissed or overlooked. The way her mood would lift, an almost manic effervescence bubbling to the surface on those Wednesday and Friday evenings before her late nights. The almost theatrical display of exhaustion she'd effect upon her return, often too tired for even a cursory good night. Yet, beneath the performance, I'd sometimes catch a flicker of something else, a lingering flush on her cheeks, a spark of excitement in her eyes that was quickly extinguished when she met my gaze. There were the credit card statements, which I began to examine with a forensic intensity. Unexplained charges at upscale restaurants I knew she hadn't visited with her usual work colleagues, restaurants in neighborhoods far from her office. Purchases from boutiques I'd never heard her mention. A recurring charge for a health and wellness subscription that, when I discreetly Googled it, turned out to be a high-end couples spa package. Each discovery was another nail in the coffin of my denial. One Saturday, she announced she was going for a spa day with the girls from work. A rare weekend indulgence, she'd claimed, much needed after a stressful week. I feigned indifference, but a cold knot of suspicion tightened in my gut. Later that afternoon, driven by an impulse I couldn't control, I drove past the spa she'd named. Her car was nowhere in sight. I circled the block, my heart pounding, a sick feeling rising in my throat. For a wild moment, I considered going inside, demanding to know if she was there. But what would that achieve? A public scene? More lies? I drove home, the image of her empty parking spot burning in my mind. When she returned that evening, glowing and relaxed, she regaled me with fabricated anecdotes about her hilarious day with Sarah and Jess. I listened, my expression carefully neutral, the taste of her deceit bitter on my tongue. The ease with which she lied, the sheer, unadulterated confidence of her deception, was breathtaking. It was as if she believed her own fabrications, or, more chillingly, simply didn't care whether I believed them or not. My sleep became a torment of disjointed images and whispered accusations. I'd lie awake for hours, listening to her even breathing beside me, wondering who she was dreaming of, whose name was on her lips when she murmured in her sleep. The intimacy of our shared bed had become a battleground, a place of profound loneliness and unspoken warfare. I started sleeping fitfully, often retreating to the spare room under the guise of not wanting to disturb her with my restlessness, though in truth, it was her presence that had become unbearable. The paranoia, as she'd so contemptuously labeled it, began to feel less like a symptom of my own insecurity and more like a rational response to an increasingly irrational situation. I was living in a house of mirrors, where nothing was as it seemed, where every reflection was distorted, every truth inverted. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that if I didn't find a way to shatter the illusion, I would lose myself entirely. The decision to hire a private investigator did not come easily. It felt like a profound betrayal, a tacit admission that the trust which formed the very bedrock of our marriage was not just fractured, but entirely obliterated. It was an act of espionage against the woman I had once vowed to love, honor, and cherish, a descent into a shadowy world of suspicion and surveillance that I had only ever encountered in fiction. For weeks, I wrestled with the idea, my mind a battleground of conflicting emotions. One part of me, the part that still clung to the ghost of the Clara I'd married, recoiled in horror. This was an unforgivable breach, a line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. It would forever taint any possibility of reconciliation, however remote that possibility already seemed. It was the act of a desperate, jealous man, and I cringed at the thought of becoming that cliché. But another, more pragmatic, and increasingly dominant part of me argued with a cold, relentless logic. What trust was left to betray? She had already shattered it, piece by piece, with her lies, her evasions, her calculated cruelty. What was I supposed to do? Continue to live in this limbo of uncertainty, slowly being driven mad by her gaslighting and my own gnawing suspicions? Was I to passively accept her narrative, to allow her to dictate the terms of our unraveling without ever knowing the true extent of her deception? The thought of confronting her again, armed only with my suspicions and her inevitable denials, was unbearable. I needed proof. Irrefutable, undeniable proof. Not for her, necessarily. I doubted even concrete evidence would elicit an honest confession, but for myself. I needed to know the truth, however ugly, however devastating, so that I could finally make a decision, any decision, based on fact rather than fear and conjecture. The breaking point came after a particularly galling incident. Clara had announced another emergency work dinner on a Friday night. I'd had a rare evening free and had made reservations at a new restaurant we'd both expressed interest in trying, hoping, foolishly, that she might be persuaded to join me. Her text, when it came, was even more dismissive than usual. Can't. Swamped. Don't be a martyr and eat alone. Later that evening, consumed by a mixture of anger and a strange, reckless curiosity, I found myself driving aimlessly through the city. And then I saw her. Or rather, I saw her car, a sleek black Audi I knew as well as my own hand, parked outside a trendy, ridiculously expensive hotel in a part of town far removed from her office or any known client's location. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled over, my hand shaking, and watched. For nearly an hour, I sat there, a knot of ice forming in my stomach, debating whether to go in, to confront her then and there. But what if I was wrong? What if there was a legitimate, if unlikely, explanation? The thought of the humiliation of her turning my suspicions into yet another example of my paranoid jealousy stayed my hand. Eventually, I drove away, the image of her car, a silent testament to her betrayal, seared into my mind. That night, I didn't sleep. The abyss beckoned, and I knew I had to step into it. The alternative, a slow, agonizing descent into madness, fueled by her lies and my own powerlessness, was no longer an option. The next morning, my decision made, I began my search for a private investigator. I wanted someone discreet, professional, and, above all, ruthlessly efficient. Someone who would bring me the unvarnished truth, no matter how damning. Finding Marcus Thorne was not difficult. In the shadowy world of private investigation, his name was whispered with a mixture of respect and trepidation. He wasn't a bottom feeder who dealt in salacious gossip for tabloid fodder. His clientele, I discovered through discreet online research and a few carefully worded inquiries to a lawyer acquaintance, consisted of high-net-worth individuals, corporations dealing with sensitive internal matters, and people like me. Spouses pushed to the brink, seeking irrefutable evidence of betrayal. His reputation was built on two pillars: absolute discretion and an uncanny ability to unearth truths that others couldn't, or wouldn't. He was known for his meticulousness, his technological savvy, and his unervingly calm demeanor in the face of human ugliness. His office, located in a nondescript building in a quieter, older part of the financial district, was as austere and intimidating as his reputation suggested. There was no ostentatious signage, just a small, discreet brass plaque bearing the name M. Thorne Investigations. The waiting room was Spartan, furnished with two severe leather armchairs and a low table bearing a single, outdated financial journal. There was no soothing music, no welcoming receptionist, just an unnerving silence that seemed to amplify the gravity of my purpose. After a few minutes, a door opened, and Marcus Thorne himself appeared. He was a man who seemed carved from granite, of medium height but with a solid, imposing presence. His suit was impeccably tailored, dark and severe. His hair was salt and pepper, neatly trimmed. But it was his eyes that held my attention, pale gray, almost colorless, like chips of ice, and they seemed to miss nothing, assessing me with a cool, detached scrutiny that made me feel transparent, my motives and my pain laid bare. He didn't offer a handshake, just a curt nod. "Mr. Hayes." His voice was a monotone, devoid of inflection, matching his glacial demeanor. "Come in." His private office was equally stark. A large mahogany desk, polished to a mirror shine, dominated the room. Behind it, a single, ergonomic chair. On the walls, no personal photographs, no diplomas, just a series of framed, abstract prints in muted colors. The only hint of personality was a collection of antique chess sets displayed in a glass cabinet, their intricate carvings a silent testament to a mind that thrived on strategy and precision. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk, and I sat, feeling an almost physical wave of apprehension. This was it. The point of no return. He didn't engage in small talk, didn't offer me coffee or water. He simply opened a slim, leather-bound notebook and picked up a fountain pen, its nib glinting in the dim light. "Tell me, Mr. Hayes," he said, his icy gaze fixed on mine, "why are you here?" My voice, when I finally found it, was hoarse, unsteady. I recounted the story, the insidious progression of Clara's behavior, the late nights, the emotional distance, the unexplained absences, the financial discrepancies, the gut-wrenching incident with her car outside the hotel. I tried to remain objective, to present the facts without embellishment, but the raw emotion, the pain and betrayal I'd been suppressing for so long, undoubtedly colored my narrative. Thorne listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. He made occasional notes in his notebook, his pen scratching softly in the otherwise silent room. He didn't offer sympathy, didn't ask clarifying questions, just absorbed my story with that same unnerving, detached focus. It was like confessing to a machine, a highly intelligent, analytical entity programmed to process human misery. When I finally finished, the silence stretched, heavy and oppressive. I felt exposed, vulnerable, the sordid details of my failing marriage laid bare before this cold, calculating stranger. He capped his pen with a precise click. "Infidelity is a common ailment, Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice still flat, devoid of judgment. "The methods of deception vary in their sophistication, but the underlying motivations are depressingly predictable." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "What outcome do you seek from my involvement?" "The truth," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "I need to know, definitively, if she is having an affair, who he is, how long it's been going on, the extent of it." I hesitated, then added, my voice dropping, "And I need proof. Irrefutable proof." Thorne nodded slowly. "Surveillance is costly, Mr. Hayes, and it can be invasive. For all parties involved." He let that sink in. "Are you prepared for what I might uncover?" The truth, as I often find, is rarely pleasant. It can be brutal. It can shatter illusions you may still, subconsciously, be clinging to. "I understand," I said, though a part of me quailed at his stark warning. "I need to know, whatever it is." He then outlined his fees, his methods, the potential timelines, all with the same dispassionate clarity. He spoke of GPS trackers, of discrete physical surveillance, of digital forensics if necessary. He explained the legalities, the ethical boundaries he operated within, and those he would not cross. It was a grim, sobering conversation, a descent into the mechanics of betrayal. "I will require a retainer," he concluded, naming a figure that made me inwardly wince, though I nodded my assent. "And I will need detailed information about your wife's routines, her vehicle, her known associates, her typical work schedule." I provided him with everything he asked for, feeling like a Judas, handing over the intimate details of my wife's life to this stranger who would now dissect it, piece by piece. As I was leaving, he said, his voice holding, for the first time, a faint trace of something other than pure detachment, perhaps a sliver of professional warning, "Mr. Hayes, once this process begins, it cannot easily be stopped, and the knowledge gained cannot be unlearned. Be certain this is the path you wish to tread." "I am," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. But as I stepped out of his office and back into the indifferent bustle of the city, a wave of nausea washed over me. I had crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back now. I had hired a professional to stalk my wife, to unearth the ugly secrets she was so desperately trying to hide. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, that whatever Marcus Thorne discovered would irrevocably alter the course of my life. The days that followed my meeting with Marcus Thorne were a unique form of torture. I existed in a state of suspended animation, a limbo of agonizing anticipation and gnawing dread. Every ring of my phone, every new email notification, sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system, a sickening lurch of hope and fear. Was this it? Was this the call from Thorne, the message containing the truth that would either confirm my worst fears or, less likely, offer an improbable reprieve? Thorne had been clear. He would contact me only when he had something concrete to report. "No news is not necessarily good news, Mr. Hayes," he cautioned. "It simply means the investigation is ongoing. Patience is a virtue in these matters." Patience, however, was a commodity in desperately short supply. My life became a series of excruciatingly slow-moving hours, each one filled with a relentless internal monologue. I replayed every conversation with Clara, scrutinized every past incident, searching for clues I might have missed, for an explanation that didn't involve infidelity. Had I been too quick to judge? Had I misinterpreted her actions? Was I, as she'd so contemptuously suggested, merely a paranoid, insecure fool? But then the images would resurface, her car outside that hotel, the unexplained credit card charges, her secretive phone calls, the coldness in her eyes, and the grim certainty would return. No, this wasn't in my head. This was real. Living with Clara during this period was an exercise in supreme self-control. I had to maintain a facade of normalcy, to feign ignorance of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I had to endure her continued late nights, her dismissive comments, her increasingly brazen displays of indifference, all while knowing that, somewhere out there, Marcus Thorne and his team were watching her, documenting her every move. There were moments when the urge to confront her, to scream my suspicions, to demand an explanation, was almost overwhelming. But Thorne's warning echoed in my mind. Asterisk, do not tip her off. Do not compromise the investigation. Asterisk, and so, I bit my tongue, swallowed my rage, and played the part of the oblivious, slightly bewildered husband. The strain was immense. I lost weight. Sleep became even more elusive. My focus at work suffered. My colleagues, I'm sure, noticed the change in me, the dark circles under my eyes, the preoccupied air, but they were too polite, or perhaps too intimidated by my increasingly grim demeanor, to comment. One evening, Clara came home later than usual, even for a work night. It was well past 1 a.m. She was flushed, her eyes overly bright, and there was a faint, almost imperceptible smudge of lipstick on the collar of her white silk blouse, a shade darker, redder, than the one she typically wore. My heart constricted. I wanted to point to it, to demand an explanation, but I forced myself to remain calm. Long night? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. She shrugged, avoiding my gaze. You know how it is. Last-minute crisis with the Henderson account. She yawned, a theatrical display of exhaustion. I'm beat. Going straight to bed. I watched her walk away, the lie hanging heavy in the air between us. The Henderson account had been finalized weeks ago. I knew this because I'd overheard her discussing its successful conclusion with a colleague on the phone. Another lie, so easily, so casually delivered. And the lipstick, it was a small thing, perhaps, but it felt like a smoking gun. Another incident occurred a few days later. I was looking for a document in her home office, a shared space we rarely used anymore, when I stumbled upon a small, velvet jewelry box tucked away in the back of her desk drawer. It wasn't one I recognized. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was a delicate gold bracelet, intricately designed with tiny, interlocking hearts. It was beautiful, expensive-looking, and most definitely not something I had given her. A gift, then? From whom? The question twisted like a knife in my gut. I closed the box, put it back exactly where I'd found it, and retreated from the room, feeling physically ill. Each of these small discoveries, these fleeting glimpses into her secret life, only amplified my anxiety, my desperate need for Thorne to deliver his findings. The not knowing was becoming unbearable. I found myself constantly checking my phone, jumping at every unexpected sound, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality, like the lines between suspicion and certainty were blurring. Was I imagining things? Was I constructing a narrative of betrayal based on circumstantial evidence and my own growing paranoia? Or was I finally seeing Clara for who she truly was, a calculating, deceitful woman capable of unimaginable cruelty? The wait for Marcus Thorne's report was more than just an agonizing period of suspense. It was a descent into a personal hell, a slow, torturous unraveling of everything I had once believed to be true about my life, my marriage, and the woman I had loved. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that when his call finally came, it would be the beginning of the end. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and drizzling, mirroring the bleak landscape of my internal world, when the first communication from Marcus Thorne finally arrived. It wasn't a phone call, as I'd half expected, half dreaded. It was a sterile, encrypted email with a subject line that simply read, Initial findings, Case H-227. My case number. My stomach clenched. My hands trembled so violently I could barely control the mouse to click it open. The email itself was brief, almost clinically detached, typical of Thorne. It stated that his team had completed the initial phase of surveillance and that he had compiled a preliminary report. He requested a meeting at his office the following afternoon. No further details were offered, no hints as to the nature of his findings. Just the stark, emotionless summons. The next 24 hours were in agony of anticipation. Sleep was out of the question. I paced the confines of our apartment like a caged animal, my mind racing, conjuring 1,000 possible scenarios, each more dreadful than the last. Was this it? Was I about to be confronted with the undeniable, visual proof of Clara's betrayal? Or, a faint, desperate flicker of hope, had Thorne found nothing? Had my suspicions been, after all, the product of an overactive imagination, a mind poisoned by jealousy and insecurity? Clara, oblivious to the storm raging within me, or perhaps simply indifferent to it, went about her evening routine with her usual air of detached composure. She spoke vaguely of a new product launch that was consuming all her energy, her explanations for her continued late nights becoming increasingly perfunctory, almost insulting in their lack of effort. I nodded, feigned interest, played the part of the supportive, if slightly bewildered, husband, all the while feeling like a condemned man awaiting the executioner's summons. The drive to Thorne's office the next afternoon felt like a journey to the gallows. The city, usually a vibrant tapestry of life and energy, seemed muted, its colors drained, its sounds muffled. I parked in the same anonymous garage, walked the same sterile corridors, my heart hammering against my ribs with a force that was almost painful. Thorne greeted me with the same curt nod, the same unnerving, assessing gaze. He gestured me to the chair, and I sat, my palms sweating, my mouth dry. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He simply opened a slim, gray folder on his desk, a folder that seemed to radiate a malevolent energy, and slid it across the polished mahogany towards me. Preliminary findings, Mr. Hayes, he said, his voice as devoid of emotion as ever. Photographic and video surveillance from the past 2 weeks. My breath hitched. I stared at the folder, my hand hovering over it, a strange reluctance warring with an undeniable, desperate need to know. It was like Schrodinger's cat. As long as the folder remained closed, there was still, however infinitesimally, a possibility that my marriage wasn't a complete sham, that Clara wasn't the monster I was beginning to fear she was. But I knew I had to open it. I had come too far to turn back now. With trembling fingers, I opened the folder. The first photograph hit me like a physical blow. It was Clara. Unmistakably Clara. She was seated at a small, secluded table in a dimly lit, expensive-looking restaurant. A restaurant I didn't recognize. One she had certainly never mentioned. Her head was tilted, her expression animated, a smile playing on her lips. A genuine, unguarded smile. The kind I hadn't seen directed at me in what felt like an eternity. And she wasn't alone. Opposite her sat a man. He was partially obscured, his back mostly to the camera, but I could see he was well-dressed, his hair dark, his build athletic. Clara was leaning towards him, her body language open, inviting, her entire being focused on him with an intensity that made my stomach churn. There was a wine bottle on the table between them, 2 glasses, the scene one of effortless intimacy. I flipped to the next photograph. Same restaurant, different angle. This time, the man was clearer. He was handsome, in a slick, predatory way, with sharp features and an air of confident arrogance. He was laughing, his head thrown back, and Clara was laughing with him, her eyes sparkling. It was a picture of 2 people thoroughly enjoying each other's company, oblivious to the world around them, lost in their own private universe. The date and timestamp in the corner of the photograph seared itself into my brain. It was from the previous Wednesday, a night Clara had claimed to be stuck in an emergency strategy session until midnight. The restaurant, according to the brief annotation beneath the photo, was Le Rêve, a notoriously expensive French establishment known for its discreet, romantic ambience. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the photographs. I felt a wave of nausea, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was tangible. This was real. I forced myself to continue. There were more photographs from that same evening. Clara and the man leaving the restaurant, his arm draped casually, possessively, around her shoulders. Her leaning into him, her head resting briefly against his chest. Then, a series of shots of them getting into a sleek, dark sports car, a Porsche, I noted with a detached, clinical part of my brain that was most definitely not Clara's Audi. The final shot from that night was of the Porsche pulling into the underground garage of a luxury apartment building in a very exclusive part of the city, a building I didn't recognize. The folder also contained photographs from another evening, the previous Friday. Clara, again with the same man. This time, they were at a different venue, a chic, dimly lit cocktail bar. The images were even more damning. Them sitting close together on a plush banquette, their heads almost touching, their conversation clearly animated. One shot caught them in a moment of shared laughter, his hand resting on her knee, her hand covering his. Another showed him leaning in to whisper something in her ear, Clara's eyes fluttering closed, a soft, almost sensual smile on her lips. My breath caught in my throat. The betrayal was so blatant, so brazen. The casual intimacy, the shared laughter, the physical touch, it was all there, laid out in stark, irrefutable black and white. The man, Thorne said, his voice cutting through the roaring in my ears, is Julian Vance. He's a senior partner at a rival marketing firm, Vayner and Sterling. A widower, according to our initial background check. Known for his, aggressive business tactics, and a certain reputation with women. He paused, letting the information sink in. They appear to have a well-established routine, Mr. Hayes. Wednesdays and Fridays. Sometimes other evenings, less predictably. They frequent a small number of upscale, discreet establishments. We are still tracking their movements, establishing the full pattern. Julian Vance. The name echoed in my mind, a venomous whisper. So this was him. The architect of my ruin. The man who had stolen my wife, my life. I closed the folder, my hands slick with sweat. I felt numb. A strange, icy calm had descended, the calm that comes after the initial shock of a devastating blow. The pain was there, a deep, throbbing ache in my chest, but it was overlaid with a chilling clarity. My suspicions hadn't been paranoia. They had been an understatement. Are they? I started, my voice hoarse, unable to finish the question. Thorne understood. We have no definitive evidence of a physical, sexual relationship from this initial surveillance, Mr. Hayes. They have been discreet. However, he added, his gaze unwavering. The level of intimacy, the frequency of their meetings, the locations they choose, the inference is strong. It would be naive to assume this is merely a platonic friendship or a professional mentorship. Naive. Yes, I had been naive. For months. For years, perhaps. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. We continue the surveillance, Thorne said. We gather more evidence. We establish the full scope of their relationship. We look for patterns, for routines, for any indication of their future plans. He paused. And you, Mr. Hayes, need to decide what you intend to do with this information. This is merely the first chapter. I nodded, unable to speak. I picked up the folder, its weight in my hands a tangible symbol of my shattered life. As I left Thorne's office, the city outside seemed harsher, colder, its beauty tainted by the ugliness I now carried within me. The first cracks had appeared, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the entire edifice of my marriage was about to come crashing down. Returning home that afternoon, the gray folder clutched in my hand like a venomous snake, was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Our apartment, once a sanctuary of shared laughter and comfortable intimacy, now felt like a mausoleum, haunted by the ghost of Clara's betrayal. Every object, every photograph, every carefully chosen piece of furniture seemed to mock me, a testament to a life that was built on lies. I hid the folder deep in the bottom drawer of my desk, beneath a pile of old financial statements, as if burying the evidence would somehow lessen its impact. But I couldn't bury the images. They were seared into my memory. Clara's laughing face turned towards Julian Vance, his hand on her knee, their bodies angled towards each other in an unmistakable dance of mutual attraction. Living with Clara in the days that followed was an exercise in exquisite torment. I had to maintain the facade, to pretend that nothing had changed, that I was still the same oblivious, slightly preoccupied husband she had come to expect. But every interaction was now filtered through the lens of her betrayal. When she spoke of her demanding work schedule, her stressful client meetings, I heard only the echo of her lies, the carefully constructed alibis for her trysts with Vance. When she offered a perfunctory peck on the cheek, her touch felt cold, tainted. When she complained of being exhausted, I pictured her laughing, energized, in the arms of another man. The anger, a cold, simmering rage, was a constant companion. It coiled in my gut, tightened my jaw, made my hands clench into fists at unexpected moments. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to hurl the damning photographs in her face and demand an explanation, a confession, anything other than her maddening, condescending indifference. But Thorne's voice, calm and cautionary, echoed in my mind. Wait. Gather more evidence. Do not compromise the investigation. And so, I waited. And I watched. And I listened. And with every passing day, the chasm between us widened, the silence grew heavier, more suffocating. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were a torment of fragmented images. Clara and Vance, their faces merging, laughing at me, whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the taste of bile in my mouth, to find Clara sleeping soundly beside me, her breathing even, her expression serene, as if she hadn't a care in the world. The irony was a cruel, bitter pill. I found myself becoming a master of subterfuge, a skill I had never possessed nor desired. I learned to mask my emotions, to feign interest in her increasingly fabricated stories, to respond to her casual cruelties with a carefully cultivated indifference. It was a performance, a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of control in a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of my grasp. One evening, she came home humming, a rare occurrence. She announced she was going to a charity gala with some colleagues from work the following Saturday. "It's a black tie affair," she said, a little too casually. "Big clients will be there. Important for networking." She even showed me the dress she'd bought for the occasion, a stunning, backless creation in deep emerald green that was far more daring, more overtly sensual than anything I'd ever seen her wear. "You look beautiful," I managed, the words feeling like ashes in my mouth. My mind immediately went to Julian Vance. Would he be there? Was this charity gala just another elaborate excuse for them to be together, to flaunt their affair under the guise of a professional obligation? I relayed the information to Thorne, along with a description of the dress and the details of the event. He listened impassively, made a few notes, and simply said, "We'll be there, Mr. Hayes." The week leading up to the gala was an agony of suspense. I imagined them together, Clara radiant in her emerald gown, Vance suave and attentive at her side, the two of them moving through the glittering crowd, a picture of sophisticated allure, their secret shared between them like a precious, forbidden jewel. The thought was a torment. On the night of the gala, Clara spent hours getting ready. Her usual brisk efficiency was replaced by a meticulous, almost obsessive attention to detail. Her hair, her makeup, her jewelry, everything had to be perfect. There was a feverish excitement about her, a nervous energy that she tried, unsuccessfully, to mask with an air of nonchalance. When she finally emerged, she was breathtaking. The emerald dress clung to her curves, her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, her eyes sparkled with an almost predatory gleam. She looked like a queen, a goddess, a woman on her way to conquer the world. Or, perhaps, just one man. "Wish me luck," she said, offering me a fleeting, distracted kiss on the cheek before sweeping out of the apartment, leaving behind the lingering scent of her expensive perfume and a profound, suffocating silence. I didn't go out. I couldn't. I paced the apartment, my nerves raw, my imagination running wild. I pictured Thorne and his team, discreetly positioned, their cameras clicking, documenting every interaction, every shared glance, every whispered word between Clara and Vance. The thought was both horrifying and strangely comforting. At least I wouldn't be alone in my knowledge. At least the truth, however ugly, would be brought into the light. It was well past 3 a.m. when Clara finally returned. Her eyes were still bright, but there was a new, almost reckless quality to her energy. Her dress was slightly rumpled, her hair a little less perfect. She was humming again, a tuneless little melody, and there was a faint, almost imperceptible flush on her cheeks. "Good night," I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Amazing," she breathed, kicking off her heels. "So much fun. And I made some incredible contacts. This could be huge for the firm." She didn't offer any more details, didn't elaborate on the incredible contacts or the fun she'd had. She simply drifted off towards the bedroom, her movements a little unsteady. I watched her go, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. I knew, with a certainty that transcended mere suspicion, that Julian Vance had been there. And I knew, with an even greater certainty, that Marcus Thorne's next report would be far more damning than the first. The cracks were no longer just appearing, they were widening, threatening to swallow me whole. The days following the charity gala were imbued with a strange, almost surreal quality. I was living a double life, the oblivious husband on the surface, and the tormented, knowing victim beneath. The weight of my secret knowledge was immense, a physical burden that stooped my shoulders and etched new lines of worry onto my face. Thorne didn't contact me immediately. He was, I knew, meticulously compiling his findings, cross-referencing data, ensuring that every piece of evidence was irrefutable. The silence from his office was almost as agonizing as the initial wait, but now it was freighted with a different kind of dread, the dread of impending, unavoidable catastrophe. Clara, in contrast, seemed almost giddy in the aftermath of the gala. Her mood was lighter, her energy levels higher. She hummed around the apartment, her laughter came more easily, though never directed at me, and she spoke with a newfound, almost arrogant confidence about her work and her future prospects. It was as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders, or perhaps, as if she were on the cusp of a thrilling new adventure. The irony of her newfound lightness, juxtaposed with the crushing weight of my own despair, was not lost on me. She started talking vaguely about needing a break, a change of scenery. "I've been working so hard, Liam," she'd say, her tone hinting at a profundity I was clearly too dull to grasp. "I think I deserve a little getaway. Just a few days to myself, to recharge, to think." My blood ran cold. Was this it? Was this the precursor to her leaving? Was Julian Vance part of this recharge plan? I feigned mild interest, asked non-committal questions, all the while my mind racing, trying to connect the dots, to anticipate her next move. The small, intimate details of our shared life, the things I had once cherished, now became sources of acute pain. The way she used to leave little notes for me in the morning, a habit long since abandoned. The scent of her shampoo on the pillow beside me. The framed photographs of us from happier times, smiling, oblivious, scattered around the apartment like relics from a forgotten civilization. Each one was a fresh stab to the heart, a reminder of what had been lost, what had been stolen. I found myself withdrawing further, not just from Clara, but from the world. I declined social invitations, made excuses to avoid friends and colleagues. I couldn't bear their pity, their well-meaning concern. I couldn't risk a careless word, a slip of the tongue, that might betray the turmoil raging within me. My world had shrunk to the confines of our apartment, to the sterile efficiency of my office, and to the agonizing, silent vigil for Marcus Thorne's final report. The waiting was a corrosive acid, eating away at my composure, my sanity. I reread the initial report countless times, staring at the photographs of Clara and Vance until their faces blurred, until the images became a grotesque tableau of my own humiliation. I analyzed every detail, every nuance, searching for some hidden meaning, some clue that might explain the inexplicable. Why? Why had she done this? What had I done, or failed to do, to drive her into the arms of another man? But there were no easy answers, no simple explanations. There was only the stark, brutal reality of her betrayal, a reality that was becoming more undeniable, more overwhelming, with each passing day. One afternoon, while Clara was out, another urgent meeting, another lie, I found myself drawn, against my better judgment, to her dressing table. Her jewelry box, an antique silver case I'd given her on our 5th anniversary, sat glinting in the afternoon sun. With trembling hands, I opened it. There, nestled amongst her familiar pieces, was the gold bracelet with the interlocking hearts, the one I'd found in her desk drawer. And beside it, something new. A pair of diamond stud earrings, small but exquisitely cut, their facets catching the light with a fiery brilliance. They were not a style Clara typically favored. They were too ostentatious, too obviously expensive. And they were most definitely not a gift from me. I picked them up, the cool weight of the diamonds surprisingly heavy in my palm. Another token from Vance, no doubt. Another symbol of their clandestine affair, another blatant disregard for me, for our marriage. I felt a wave of cold, hard rage, an almost uncontrollable urge to smash the earrings, to destroy every last vestige of her treachery. But I didn't. I carefully placed them back in the box, closed the lid, and walked away, the image of those glittering diamonds burning a hole in my mind. The evidence was mounting, not just from Thorne's investigation, but from my own unwilling discoveries. Clara wasn't just having an affair. She was building a new life, a life that didn't include me, a life financed, at least in part, by her lover. And she was doing it right under my nose, with a chilling arrogance, a profound and utter contempt for my feelings, for our shared history. The weight of knowing was becoming unbearable. It was a constant, suffocating pressure, a tightening band around my chest that made it difficult to breathe. I felt like I was drowning, slowly, inexorably, in a sea of deceit and betrayal. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that Marcus Thorne's final report would be the wave that finally pulled me under. The email arrived on a Monday morning, a day already fraught with the usual sense of impending weekly dread, now amplified 1,000-fold. The subject line was stark, devoid of any preamble. Final report, Case H-227. Meeting requested. Signed, M. Thorne. My blood turned ice. This was it. The culmination of weeks of agonizing suspense, of sleepless nights and days spent walking a tightrope of feigned ignorance. The final act in the tragicomedy of my unraveling marriage was about to begin. I read the email 3 times, as if repetition could somehow alter its chillingly concise message. Thorne requested my presence at his office at 2 p.m. the following day. No further information, No hint of the cataclysmic revelations that undoubtedly awaited me. Just the cold, impersonal summons. The next 36 hours passed in a blur of heightened anxiety and a strange, almost out-of-body detachment. I moved through the motions of my life, work, perfunctory conversations with colleagues, the strained silence of my evenings with Clara, but I felt disconnected, like an actor playing a poorly rehearsed role. My mind was elsewhere, trapped in a claustrophobic antechamber of dread, awaiting the unveiling of my personal ruin. Clara, blissfully unaware of the precipice upon which our lives teetered, or perhaps simply unconcerned, continued her charade with an almost unnerving cheerfulness. She was full of plans for her upcoming solo retreat, a trip to a secluded spa resort in Napa Valley she booked for the following weekend. She spoke of needing to find herself, to reevaluate her priorities, her pronouncements laced with a new-agey jargon that grated on my already frayed nerves. Every word felt like a carefully crafted lie, a prelude to the final, devastating blow she was undoubtedly planning to deliver. I listened, nodded, made the appropriate noises of mild, supportive interest, all the while picturing Marcus Thorne's final report, a thick, damning dossier that would expose her solo retreat, for the sordid tryst it almost certainly was. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, the callousness almost inhuman. Sleep, on that final night before the meeting, was an impossibility. I lay in the darkness, listening to the rhythmic rise and fall of Clara's breathing beside me, the breathing of a woman untroubled by conscience, untortured by guilt. The irony was a burning coal in my chest. I replayed every moment of our life together, from the first flush of love to the slow, agonizing decay of our marriage, searching for a sign, a warning, a single moment where I might have averted this catastrophic outcome. But there was nothing. Only the relentless, sickening realization that I had been living a lie, that the woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted implicitly, was a stranger, a master manipulator capable of unimaginable deceit. The drive to Thorne's office the next day felt like a funereal procession. The city, bathed in the harsh, unforgiving light of a late autumn afternoon, seemed to mock my despair. Each familiar landmark was a painful reminder of a life that was about to be irrevocably shattered. When I arrived at Thorne's building, my hands were slick with sweat, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I took a deep, steadying breath before stepping out of the car, trying to compose myself, to project an air of calm I was far from feeling. This was not a moment for weakness, for emotional collapse. This was a moment for cold, hard truth, however devastating. Thorne greeted me with his usual unnerving composure. There was no flicker of sympathy in his icy gray eyes, no hint of the cataclysm he was about to unleash. He was simply the purveyor of ugly truths, the dispassionate chronicler of human failing. He gestured me to the chair, the same chair where I had first unburdened my suspicions, and I sat, bracing myself for the inevitable. The room was exactly as I remembered it, austere, silent, imbued with an almost palpable sense of gravitas. This time, the folder he placed on the polished mahogany desk was significantly thicker than the preliminary report. It was bound in the same nondescript gray, but its very heft seemed to radiate a more profound, more comprehensive damnation. The final report, Mr. Hayes, Thorne said, his voice as flat and devoid of emotion as ever. As you requested, it is comprehensive. It includes detailed surveillance logs, photographic and video evidence, financial transaction analyses, and relevant digital communications we were able to acquire. The casual mention of acquired digital communications sent a fresh chill down my spine. Thorne, I was beginning to understand, operated in a world where ethical boundaries were, perhaps, more flexible than he had initially let on. But at this point, I didn't care. I wanted the truth, by any means necessary. He didn't offer any further preamble, no gentle easing into the devastating revelations that lay within the folder. He simply pushed it across the desk towards me. I will leave you to review it. Take your time. I will be in the adjoining room if you have any questions. And with that, he rose and silently exited, leaving me alone with the meticulously documented evidence of my wife's treachery. For a long moment, I just stared at the folder, my breath catching in my throat. This was it. The point of no return. The moment when all illusions would be shattered, all hope extinguished. With a hand that trembled uncontrollably, I reached out and opened the final report. The contents of Marcus Thorne's final report were not just damning. They were a meticulous, cold-blooded dissection of Clara's secret life, a forensic accounting of her betrayal that left no room for doubt, no sliver of hope. No possibility of misunderstanding. It was a masterpiece of surveillance, a testament to Thorne's ruthless efficiency, and it was, without a doubt, the most painful thing I had ever read. The report began with a detailed timeline, charting Clara's affair with Julian Vance from its suspected inception. Nearly 18 months prior, Thorne's analysis suggested, based on patterns of communication and financial anomalies, to the present day. 18 months. A year and a half of lies, of deception, of living a double life while I, her husband, remained blissfully, stupidly, ignorant. The sheer duration of the affair was a staggering blow, a testament to her capacity for sustained, calculated deceit. Then came the surveillance logs, day by agonizing day, week by heartbreaking week. Thorne's team had been relentless, their observations chillingly precise. Every clandestine meeting, every stolen lunch, every late-night rendezvous was documented with an almost obsessive attention to detail. The names of restaurants, the addresses of boutique hotels, the license plates of taxis, the exact duration of their trysts, it was all there, laid out in cold, hard type. The emergency work dinners, the late-night strategy sessions, the client networking events, all exposed as elaborate shams, carefully constructed alibis for her liaisons with Vance. The spa day with the girls, the charity gala, each one a carefully orchestrated opportunity for them to be together, to flaunt their affair under the guise of innocent social or professional engagements. The photographic evidence was even more devastating than the preliminary report had suggested. There were hundreds of photographs, each one a fresh stab to the heart. Clara and Vance, their faces alight with laughter, their bodies angled towards each other in unmistakable intimacy, sharing secrets, sharing wine, sharing a life that was entirely separate from mine. There were images of them holding hands as they strolled through a park on a sunny afternoon, an afternoon Clara had claimed to be swamped with deadlines at the office. There were shots of them emerging from a discreet, members-only club late at night, Vance's arm possessively around her waist, her head nestled against his shoulder. There was a particularly galling series of photographs taken outside a high-end jewelry store, Vance presenting Clara with a small, velvet box, the source, no doubt, of the diamond earrings I had found in her jewelry case. And then there were the hotel photographs. Thorne's team had managed to obtain images of them entering and exiting several boutique hotels, often in the middle of the workday, sometimes for several hours at a time. The implications were sickeningly clear. Their affair was not just emotional, it was deeply, consummately physical. The financial analysis section of the report detailed a pattern of systematic deception. Clara had, as I had begun to suspect, been siphoning money from our joint accounts into a private, undeclared bank account for months. There were unexplained cash withdrawals, charges for lavish gifts, undoubtedly for Vance, and payments for hotel rooms and expensive dinners that far exceeded her declared income or legitimate business expenses. Thorne had even uncovered evidence of a joint investment account she had opened with Vance, a clear indication of their long-term plans. But perhaps the most damning, the most viscerally sickening, part of the report was the section on acquired digital communications. Thorne, with his shadowy expertise, had managed to gain access to a trove of text messages and emails exchanged between Clara and Vance. Reading them was like voluntarily ingesting poison. Their messages were a tapestry of shared intimacies, of coded language, of plans for their clandestine meetings, and, most painfully, of their mutual disdain for me. They referred to me as the ball and chain, Mr. Predictable, the deadweight. Clara complained about my lack of ambition, my boring routines, my emotional neediness. Vance, in turn, offered her sympathy, validation, and promises of a thrilling, passionate future free from the shackles of her stifling marriage. There were explicit descriptions of their sexual encounters, detailed with a crassness that made my stomach churn. There were declarations of love, promises of undying devotion, and, most chillingly, detailed discussions about their future together once Clara had managed her exit strategy, a euphemism, I now understood, for divorcing me and securing the most favorable financial settlement possible. They had discussed how she should handle me, how she should feign unhappiness and dissatisfaction to lay the groundwork for her departure. Vance had coached her on how to manipulate me, how to play the victim, how to ensure that I would be perceived as the cause of our marital breakdown. Reading their words, I felt a cold, murderous rage unlike anything I had ever experienced. This wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated, premeditated conspiracy to destroy me, financially and emotionally. This solo retreat to Napa Valley, the report confirmed, was indeed a romantic getaway planned for her and Vance. Thorne had even included copies of their joint flight confirmations in the reservation for a luxurious private villa, booked under Vance's name. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of her lies, the casual cruelty with which she had planned to deceive me one last time, was almost beyond comprehension. By the time I reached the end of the report, my hands were shaking so violently that I could barely turn the pages. I felt physically ill, my stomach churning, my head throbbing. The room seemed to spin, the stark, minimalist decor of Thorne's office blurring into a nauseating vortex. This was not just betrayal, this was annihilation. Clara had not just cheated on me. She had systematically dismantled our life, our shared history, our future, with a chilling, sociopathic precision. She had lied to me, stolen from me, conspired against me, all while wearing a mask of innocent victimhood. The woman I had loved, the woman I had married, did not exist. She was a phantom, a carefully constructed illusion, and I had been her willing, unsuspecting dupe. When Marcus Thorne re-entered the room, he found me sitting motionless, the open folder on the desk before me, my face ashen, my eyes staring blankly into the middle distance. I was a man hollowed out, a shell of my former self, the vibrant core of my being extinguished by the devastating force of his revelations. He didn't speak, didn't offer any platitudes or expressions of sympathy. He simply stood there, his presence a silent, unnerving testament to the brutal truth he had delivered. After what felt like an eternity, I finally managed to find my voice, though it was a hoarse, broken whisper, unrecognizable even to myself. It's worse than I ever imagined. Thorne nodded, a curt, almost imperceptible movement. The truth often is, Mr. Hayes. 18 months, I said, the words catching in my throat. She's been lying to me, deceiving me, for a year and a half. The sheer scale of her duplicity was still difficult to comprehend. The patterns suggest a sustained, well-established relationship, Thorne confirmed, his voice as dispassionate as ever. This was not a fleeting indiscretion, Mr. Hayes. This was a parallel life. A parallel life. Yes, that was exactly what it was. While I had been living in our shared reality, or what I had believed to be our shared reality, Clara had been inhabiting another world entirely, a world of clandestine meetings, illicit passion, and secret plans for a future that did not include me. And the money, I continued, my voice laced with a new, bitter anger. She's been stealing from me, conspiring with him to ruin me. The financial irregularities are significant, Thorne acknowledged. There is clear evidence of misappropriation of joint assets and a concerted effort to conceal financial information. This will undoubtedly be a factor in any subsequent legal proceedings. Legal proceedings. Divorce. The words, once abstract and distant, now loomed with a terrifying, unavoidable imminence. My marriage was not just broken. It was a toxic, irreparable ruin. What do I do now? I asked, the question hanging heavy in the sterile air of Thorne's office. It was a plea, a desperate cry for guidance from a man who had navigated these treacherous waters countless times before. Thorne regarded me for a long moment, his icy gray eyes holding mine. That, Mr. Hayes, is a decision only you can make. My role was to provide you with the truth. What you choose to do with that truth is your prerogative. He paused, then added, a rare hint of something almost resembling professional advice in his tone. However, I would strongly recommend that you consult with a competent divorce attorney as soon as possible. Given the financial complexities and the clear evidence of misrepresentation on your wife's part, you will need expert legal counsel to protect your interests. He gestured towards the folder. This report, and the evidence contained within it, will be invaluable in that regard. It provides a clear, irrefutable record of events. I nodded, my mind struggling to process the practical implications of this cataclysm. Divorce. Lawyers. Financial settlements. It all seemed so cold, so clinical, so utterly inadequate to address the profound, emotional devastation I was experiencing. And Clara? I asked, the name tasting like poison on my tongue. What about her? About Vance. Their plans for the Napa Valley trip are, as you know, imminent, Thorne said. They are scheduled to depart on Friday. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. You have approximately 72 hours to decide on your course of action, Mr. Hayes. 72 hours. 3 days to absorb the full impact of this catastrophic betrayal, to process a year and a half of lies and deceit, and to decide how I was going to confront the woman who had systematically destroyed my life. I rose from the chair, my legs unsteady, feeling 100 years old. I picked up the folder, its weight now a crushing burden, a physical manifestation of my shattered illusions. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," I said, the words a hollow formality. "You have delivered what you promised." He inclined his head, a gesture that could have been acknowledgement or dismissal. "My condolences for your situation, Mr. Hayes, and my best wishes for navigating the difficult path ahead." As I walked out of Marcus Thorne's office and into the harsh, indifferent glare of the afternoon sun, I felt a profound sense of desolation, a loneliness so vast, so complete, that it threatened to swallow me whole. The truth, in all its ugly, brutal glory, was mine. And I knew, with a certainty that resonated in the very marrow of my bones, that my life would never, ever be the same. The final act was about to begin, and I, the unsuspecting victim, was now, reluctantly, terrifyingly, in control of the script. The 72 hours that followed my meeting with Marcus Thorne were a descent into a private hell, a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, grief, rage, betrayal, and a chilling, almost inhuman numbness that threatened to consume me entirely. The world outside continued its relentless, indifferent rhythm, but my internal landscape was a wasteland, scorched by the irrefutable truth of Clara's treachery. The drive home from Thorne's office was a blur. I vaguely remember navigating the familiar streets, the city lights smearing into abstract patterns of pain. The folder, that damning dossier of my wife's secret life, lay on the passenger seat beside me, a malevolent presence, its contents seared into my consciousness. When I arrived back at our apartment, a term that now felt like a cruel mockery, Clara was there, humming in the kitchen as she prepared dinner, the picture of domestic bliss. The normalcy of it, juxtaposed with the monstrous reality I now carried within me, was almost unbearable. "Rough day, darling?" she asked, her voice laced with that practiced, saccharine sweetness that now turned my stomach. She didn't even look up from the vegetables she was chopping. I mumbled something non-committal, avoiding her gaze, unable to trust myself to speak, to maintain the facade of ignorance for even a moment longer. The urge to unleash the torrent of rage and pain that was consuming me, to hurl the contents of Thorne's report at her feet and watch her carefully constructed world crumble, was almost overwhelming. But I didn't. Some deeply buried instinct for self-preservation, some cold, calculating part of my brain that had not yet succumbed to the emotional devastation, held me back. Thorne's words echoed. "You have approximately 72 hours to decide on your course of action." This was not a decision to be made in the heat of passion, in a blind fury that would only give her the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. This required thought. This required strategy. This required a cold, hard precision that would match, and perhaps even surpass, her own calculated cruelty. I retreated to my study, the folder clutched in my hand, and locked the door. For hours, I sat there in the gathering darkness, the report spread out before me, rereading the sickening details, absorbing the full, devastating impact of her betrayal. The photographs, the surveillance logs, the explicit text messages, each one a fresh twist of the knife, each one a testament to the depth of her deception. Grief washed over me in suffocating waves, grief for the woman I had loved, the woman I now realized had never truly existed, grief for the life we had built, a life that was now revealed as a hollow sham, grief for the years I had wasted, the love I had squandered on a lie. Then came the rage, a white-hot, all-consuming fury that threatened to incinerate everything in its path. I wanted to destroy something, to smash, to scream, to unleash the violence that was coiling in my gut. I pictured Julian Vance's smug, predatory face, Clara's deceitful smile, and I felt a murderous hatred so profound, so visceral, that it terrified me. But beneath the grief and the rage, a new, colder emotion began to take root, a chilling, almost inhuman resolve. Clara had underestimated me. She had mistaken my love for weakness, my trust for naivety. She had believed she could manipulate me, deceive me, discard me, without consequence. She was wrong. I would not be the weeping, broken victim she undoubtedly expected. I would not give her the satisfaction of my emotional collapse. No, I would meet her treachery with a calculated, surgical precision. I would be the architect of her reckoning. Sleep, when it finally came in the small, desolate hours of the morning, was a brief, troubled respite, filled with nightmarish images of Clara and Vance, their faces merging, their laughter echoing in the darkness. I awoke feeling exhausted, hollowed out, but with a new, steely clarity. The next day, Wednesday, was a blur of suppressed emotion and meticulous planning. I went to work, moving through the motions of my job like an automaton, my mind a whirlwind of strategic calculations. I called in sick for Thursday and Friday, citing a sudden, severe flu, an alibi that would give me the uninterrupted time I needed to prepare. Clara, when I told her, expressed a token concern that was almost laughable in its insincerity. "Oh, darling, you poor thing," she'd cooed from a safe distance. "Do you need me to pick anything up for you?" Her primary concern, I knew, was whether my illness would interfere with her precious Napa Valley getaway with Vance. I reassured her that I would be fine, that she should go ahead with her well-deserved retreat. The irony was a bitter, burning taste in my mouth. That evening, while Clara was out, another last-minute work thing before her trip, I began my preparations. I contacted my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Eleanor Vance, no relation, I noted with a grim, humorless irony, to my wife's paramour, who specialized in high-conflict divorces. I emailed her a summary of the situation and a heavily redacted version of Thorne's report, withholding the most explicit details for our in-person meeting, which I scheduled for the following week. Her initial response was swift and encouraging. "Mr. Hayes, the evidence you possess is substantial. We will protect your interest vigorously." Then, I turned my attention to the confrontation itself. This would not be a spontaneous outburst of anger and accusations. This would be a carefully orchestrated performance, a psychological dismantling of Clara's carefully constructed facade. I needed to control the narrative, to dictate the terms of engagement, to ensure that she could not wriggle free with her usual repertoire of lies, denials, and manipulative tactics. I thought about the setting. Our apartment, the scene of so many of her deceptions, felt appropriate. The dining room, with its stark, minimalist decor, would provide a suitably sterile, almost clinical backdrop for the unveiling of her ruin. I considered the timing. Friday evening, just hours before she was due to depart for her solo retreat with Vance. The symbolism was potent. Her planned romantic getaway would be an escape from me, not with her lover as planned, and the life she was so eager to discard. I began to script my lines, to anticipate her responses, her inevitable attempts at gaslighting and deflection. I reviewed Thorne's report again and again, memorizing key dates, specific incidents, damning quotes from her text messages with Vance. I would meet her lies with irrefutable facts, her denials with cold, hard evidence. I even thought about the small details. What I would wear? Something simple, understated, projecting an air of calm, steely resolve. What I would drink? Water, perhaps, to keep my mind clear, my emotions in check. No alcohol, no stimulants that might cloud my judgment or weaken my resolve. As I meticulously planned the impending confrontation, a strange, almost unsettling calmness descended upon me. The grief and rage were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but they were now channeled, focused, transformed into a cold, hard instrument of retribution. I was no longer the victim, the unsuspecting dupe. I was the avenger, the orchestrator of justice, the architect of Clara's reckoning. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that when she walked into that dining room on Friday evening, expecting to deliver her final, manipulative coup de grace, she would instead find herself facing a judge, jury, an executioner she had never anticipated. Thursday was a day of eerie, unsettling calm. Clara, buoyed by the prospect of her imminent retreat and oblivious to the storm gathering on her horizon, was almost cheerful. She bustled around the apartment, packing her suitcase, making last-minute arrangements, her energy a stark, jarring contrast to the funereal atmosphere that had settled over my own soul. She made a point of being solicitous, asking about my flu, offering to make me tea, even suggesting she postpone her trip if I was really unwell. Her performance of concerned wife was almost flawless, a masterclass in duplicity. I played my part, assuring her I was on the mend, that she absolutely should not change her plans, that I would be perfectly fine on my own. Each word was a carefully chosen lie, a move in the deadly chess game we were unknowingly playing. I spent the day in my study, ostensibly recovering, but in reality, fine-tuning my strategy for the confrontation. I reread Thorne's report one last time, not for new information. Its sickening contents were already seared into my memory, but to fortify my resolve, to reignite the cold, hard anger that would fuel my actions. I thought about the various scenarios that might unfold. Would she break down and confess? Unlikely. Her capacity for denial, for self-deception, was, I now realized, almost limitless. Would she try to turn the tables, To accuse me of paranoia, of invading her privacy? Almost certainly. Would she attempt to manipulate me with tears, with pleas for forgiveness, with promises of change? Perhaps, but I was prepared for all of it. I had an answer for every lie, a countermove for every tactic. I also spent some time on practical matters. I contacted my bank, placed a freeze on our joint accounts, and moved a significant portion of my personal savings into a new, separate account. Eleanor Vance had advised this as a precautionary measure, given Clara's demonstrated history of financial malfeasance. It was a small, pragmatic step, but it felt like a reclaiming of control, a tangible assertion of my independence. I looked at photographs of us from earlier, happier times. Our wedding day, vacations in Italy and Greece, quiet evenings at home, our faces alight with a love I had believed to be real, to be enduring. The pain was a dull, persistent ache, a reminder of the profound, irretrievable loss. But there was no longer any room for sentimentality, for wistful regret. That part of me, the part that had loved Clara, the part that had believed in our future, was dead, murdered by her betrayal. What remained was a harder, colder, more cynical version of myself, a man forged in the crucible of deceit. As evening approached, Clara's excitement became almost palpable. She laid out the clothes she planned to wear for her trip, a collection of new, stylish outfits that I now knew were intended for Vance's eyes, not for solitary contemplation. She double-checked her flight details, confirmed her spa appointments, her voice bright, animated, as she spoke on the phone to the resort, or so she claimed. She even made a half-hearted attempt at seduction that evening, a gesture so out of character, so transparently manipulative, that it was almost laughable. She wore a new silk robe, another purchase I didn't recognize, and perched on the edge of my bed, her expression a carefully crafted blend of concern and allure. "Are you sure you're going to be okay on your own, darling?" she purred, her hand reaching out to stroke my arm. "I'll miss you terribly." Her touch felt like a viper's kiss. I recoiled inwardly, but maintained my composure. "I'll be fine, Clara," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "You go and enjoy your break. You deserve it." The last words were laced with an irony so bitter, so profound, that I was surprised she didn't detect it. But she didn't. She was too caught up in her own deceptions, too blinded by her arrogance, to see the abyss that was opening up before her. She gave me a lingering, theatrical kiss, a Judas kiss if ever there was one, and then retreated to her own side of the bed, her mind already in Napa Valley, in the arms of her lover. I lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the silence of the apartment, the silence of a dying marriage. The calm before the storm. Tomorrow, the reckoning would begin. And I, Liam Hayes, the cuckolded husband, the unsuspecting fool, would be its architect. Friday dawned, gray and oppressive, a fitting prelude to the drama that was about to unfold. Clara was a whirlwind of last-minute preparations, her excitement barely contained. Her flight to Napa wasn't until late afternoon, but she was already packed, her suitcase standing by the door like a symbol of her impending escape, an escape that I was about to derail in the most spectacular fashion. She chattered incessantly about her plans for the retreat, the yoga classes, the meditation sessions, the gourmet spa cuisine. Each word was a fresh insult, a new layer of deceit piled upon the mountain of lies she had already constructed. I listened, nodded, offered an occasional monosyllabic response, my mind focused on the task ahead. I had decided against a dramatic, theatrical unveiling of Thorne's report. No shouting, no accusations hurled across the room, no satisfying, cinematic explosion of rage. That would be too predictable, too messy. It would give her an opportunity to play the victim, to feign hysteria, to deflect and deny. No, my approach would be colder, more clinical, more psychologically devastating. I would dismantle her, piece by piece, with the irrefutable weight of evidence, until there was nothing left of her carefully constructed facade but rubble and ruin. While Clara was in the shower, I made my final preparations in the dining room. I cleared the stark, modern table of its usual centerpiece, leaving its polished surface bare, almost surgical. I placed 2 simple water glasses and a carafe of iced water. No wine, no distractions. I positioned 2 chairs opposite each other, creating an almost interrogative atmosphere. Then, I retrieved Thorne's report from its hiding place. I didn't place the entire folder on the table. That would be too overwhelming, too crude. Instead, I carefully selected a few key documents. The photograph of her and Vance at Le Rêve, their heads close together in intimate conversations. A copy of a hotel bill from one of their clandestine afternoon trysts, clearly showing Vance's name, and a room charge that spoke volumes, and a single, devastating page of their text message exchange, the one where they referred to me as the ball and chain, and discussed Clara's exit strategy. I placed these documents face down on the table, a silent, ominous prelude to the revelations to come. The rest of the report, the full, damning weight of it, remained hidden in my study, ready to be produced if, and when, necessary. When Clara emerged from the bedroom, dressed in a stylish travel outfit, her face glowing with anticipation, she glanced into the dining room, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "What's all this, Liam?" she asked, her tone light, a hint of suspicion creeping in. "Are we having a formal pre-trip chat?" "Something like that," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Before you leave, Clara, there are a few things we need to discuss. In private." She hesitated, her smile faltering. Something in my tone and my demeanor had clearly unsettled her. The predatory confidence she had worn like a second skin for months seemed to flicker, replaced by a fleeting, almost imperceptible expression of unease. "Can it wait, darling?" she said, glancing at her watch. "My taxi will be here in an hour. I really don't want to be late for my flight." "This won't take long," I said, my voice devoid of warmth, of reassurance. "But it can't wait. Please, Clara, sit down." I gestured towards one of the chairs, my gaze unwavering. For a long moment, she just stood there, her eyes searching mine, a dawning awareness of some unseen, impending doom reflected in their depths. The hunter was about to become the hunted. Reluctantly, almost defiantly, she walked into the dining room and sat down, perching on the edge of the chair, her expensive handbag clutched in her lap like a shield. The air crackled with unspoken tension, with the suffocating weight of secrets about to be unveiled. I took my seat opposite her, the polished table a vast, empty expanse between us. I poured her a glass of water, then one for myself, my movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. She watched me, her eyes narrowed, her composure beginning to fray at the edges. The stage was set. The players were in position. The final act of our tragic farce was about to begin. And I, Liam Hayes, the wronged husband, the architect of this reckoning, was ready. The calm before the storm had passed. The tempest was about to break. The silence in the dining room was a living entity, thick and suffocating, pressing down on us with an almost physical weight. Clara sat rigidly in her chair, her earlier bravado replaced by a palpable, nervous tension. Her eyes, usually so adept at projecting cool indifference or calculated charm, darted around the room, avoiding my steady, unwavering gaze. The hunter, indeed, was beginning to sense the trap. I allowed the silence to stretch, to work its insidious magic, to heighten her unease. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water, my movements calm, almost leisurely, a stark contrast to the frantic hammering of my own heart. Let her squirm. Let her anticipate. Let her begin to understand that this was not going to be a conversation she could control, a narrative she could manipulate. Finally, when the tension had reached an almost unbearable pitch, I spoke, my voice low, devoid of inflection, the voice of a judge about to pronounce sentence. "Clara," I began, "we've been married for nearly 10 years. A statement of fact, innocuous enough on the surface, yet in this charged atmosphere, it landed with the weight of an accusation. She flinched, almost imperceptibly. "Yes, Liam," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too brittle. "A long time. We've had our ups and downs, haven't we?" She attempted a smile, a weak, unconvincing imitation of her usual confident charm. "We have," I agreed, my gaze unwavering. "And for a significant portion of that time, Clara, I believed we had something real. Something built on trust, on honesty, on mutual respect." Her smile faltered. "Of course, we did, Liam. We do." The denial was automatic, reflexive, but her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. "Do we, Clara?" I pressed, my voice still quiet, still controlled, but with an underlying edge of steel that she could not have failed to detect. Because lately, for a very long time now, I've begun to question that. I've begun to question everything. "Liam, what is this about?" she said, her voice rising slightly, a hint of impatience, of her usual dismissiveness, creeping in. "If this is another one of your moods, your insecurities, I really don't have time for it. My taxi will be here soon." She made a move as if to rise, to escape the suffocating confines of this unexpected inquisition. "Sit down, Clara," I said, my voice hardening, no longer a request but a command. This isn't about my moods or my insecurities. This is about your lies. The word hung in the air between us, ugly and irrefutable. She froze, her hand halfway to the table, her eyes widening, a flicker of genuine fear, of dawning comprehension, replacing her carefully constructed composure. Lies? She echoed, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. What are you talking about? I haven't lied to you. Haven't you? I leaned forward slightly, my gaze pinning hers. Let's talk about your late nights at work, Clara. Your emergency strategy sessions. Your client dinners. Shall we start there? A flush began to creep up her neck, staining her pale skin. I have a demanding career, Liam. You know that. I've explained this to you 100 times. Her voice was stronger now, laced with a defensive anger, the reflex of a cornered animal. Yes, you have, I said. You've explained it with a remarkable consistency, a commendable attention to detail. Almost as if it were a well-rehearsed script. I paused, letting the implication sink in. But the truth, Clara, has a funny way of emerging, doesn't it? No matter how carefully one tries to bury it. I reached for the first document on the table, the photograph of her and Julian Vance at Lou Rev, their heads close together in intimate conversation. I turned it over and slid it across the polished surface towards her. Recognize this, Clara? I asked, my voice deceptively soft. Lou Rev, I believe. Last Wednesday. A particularly demanding strategy session, wasn't it? Her eyes fell upon the photograph, and I saw the color drain from her face. Her carefully constructed composure began to crumble, the first cracks appearing in her impenetrable facade. She stared at the image, her mouth slightly agape, her breath catching in her throat. For a long moment, she was speechless, her mind clearly scrambling, searching for an explanation, a denial, a way out of this undeniable trap. That's just a colleague, Liam, she finally stammered, her voice barely audible. Julian Vance. We were discussing a potential collaboration. It was a business dinner. The lie was weak, unconvincing, even to her own ears. Julian Vance, I repeated, savoring the name, the sound of it a venom on my tongue. A colleague. Is that what you call him, Clara? Is that how colleagues behave? Leaning in so close, sharing intimate smiles, their hands almost touching. I gestured towards the photograph. He seems to be a very attentive colleague, wouldn't you say? You're twisting things, Liam, she cried, her voice rising, a note of hysteria creeping in. It was perfectly innocent. You're taking it out of context. How did you even get this? Her eyes darted from the photograph to my face, a new, sharper fear dawning in their depths, the fear of exposure, of the full extent of my knowledge. How I got it is irrelevant, Clara, I said, my voice still unnervingly calm. What matters is what it depicts. And what it depicts, my dear, is not an innocent business dinner. It depicts a betrayal. I reached for the second document, the hotel bill, and slid it across the table to join the photograph. And this, Clara? Is this also part of your demanding career? The Grand Regency Hotel, I believe. A 2-hour meeting in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. With your colleague, Julian Vance, of course. Room 714. King Suite with a city view. Very conducive to business discussions, I imagine. Her eyes scanned the hotel bill, her face now ashen, her hands trembling. The evidence was mounting, each piece a fresh blow to her crumbling defenses. She looked trapped, desperate, her usual arsenal of manipulative tactics failing her in the face of this cold, hard, irrefutable proof. I can explain, she stammered, her voice cracking. It's not what it looks like, Liam. Julian, he was going through a difficult time. He needed someone to talk to. I was just being a friend. A friend. I echoed, my voice laced with a contempt so profound it was almost a physical force. Is that what you call it, Clara? Sneaking off to hotel rooms in the middle of the day with another man? Is that your definition of friendship? I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Or is it your definition of an affair? The word affair hung in the air between us, stark and brutal, a verbal grenade that had finally detonated. Clara flinched as if struck. The carefully constructed mask of the wronged, misunderstood wife was shattering, revealing the panicked, deceitful woman beneath. No, she cried, her voice rising to a near shriek. It's not an affair. How dare you accuse me of such a thing? Her eyes blazed with a desperate, theatrical indignation, but it was a performance born of fear, not conviction. She was thrashing, a fish caught on a hook, trying to wriggle free, but the evidence was too strong, the trap too well laid. I dare, because it's the truth, Clara, I said, my voice still unnervingly calm, a stark contrast to her rising hysteria. A truth you have gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal. A truth you have lied about, repeatedly, shamelessly, for a very long time. I reached for the third document, the page of text messages, and placed it before her, alongside the photograph and the hotel bill. And this, Clara? Is this also perfectly innocent? Your intimate exchanges with your friend, Julian? Referring to your husband, the man you vowed to love and honor, as the ball and chain? Discussing your exit strategy from our marriage? Planning your romantic getaways while I, the boring, predictable fool, remained oblivious. Her eyes scanned the printed page, her face contorting in a mixture of horror and disbelief. This was the blow she hadn't anticipated, the irrefutable proof of her malicious intent, her cold-blooded conspiracy. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin a ghastly, mottled white. She looked as if she might faint. Where did you get these?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, her eyes wide with a new, more profound terror. The fear of a cornered liar who knows the game is up. "Does it matter, Clara?" I countered, my voice relentless. "Does it change the fact that these are your words? Your thoughts? Your plans? Does it alter the reality of your betrayal?" She stared at the page, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a dawning, horrifying realization of the full extent of her exposure. The carefully constructed edifice of her deceit was crumbling around her, and there was nowhere left to hide. For a long, agonizing moment, she said nothing. The only sound in the room was her ragged breathing and the frantic, desperate thumping of my own heart. I watched her, waiting, my expression unreadable, giving her no quarter, no hint of an escape route. Then, finally, she broke. Her shoulders slumped, her head bowed, and a choked sob escaped her lips. Tears, genuine tears this time, not the crocodile tears of a manipulative actress, began to stream down her face, tracing paths through her expensive makeup. The mask was gone, shattered into a million pieces, revealing the raw, ugly truth of the woman beneath. I'm sorry, Liam," she whispered, her voice thick with tears, her words almost lost in her sobs. "I'm so sorry. Sorry." The word, once so potent, so meaningful, now felt hollow, inadequate, an insult to the profound, devastating pain she had inflicted. "Sorry for what, Clara?" I pressed, my voice still cold, still unforgiving. "Sorry for the affair? Sorry for the lies? Sorry for the deceit? Sorry for treating me like a fool, a convenience, a stepping stone on your path to a more exciting life? Or are you simply sorry you got caught?" She looked up, her face streaked with tears, her eyes pleading, desperate. "No, Liam, please. It's not like that. I never meant to hurt you. It just happened." "It just happened?" I echoed, my voice rising for the first time, a dangerous tremor of the rage I had so carefully suppressed finally breaking through. An 18-month affair, meticulously planned, carefully concealed, with a man you were conspiring with to dismantle our marriage and our finances. That doesn't just happen, Clara. That is a choice. A series of deliberate, calculated choices, made day after day, week after week, month after month. My voice was raw now, filled with the pain and fury I had held in check for so long. The carefully constructed calm was beginning to crack, the emotional dam threatening to burst. "You chose to lie to me, Clara," I continued, my voice gaining volume, gaining intensity. "You chose to betray my trust. You chose to sneak around, to meet him in secret, to share your body, your thoughts, your future, with another man, while I, your husband, continued to love you, to trust you, to believe in us." Her sobs intensified, her body shaking with the force of her emotion. "I know, Liam, I know. I made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. But I was unhappy, Liam. So unhappy. And Julian, he listened to me. He understood me. He made me feel alive again. Alive." I spat the word, my voice dripping with contempt. "He made you feel alive by helping you destroy the life we built together? By encouraging you to deceive and manipulate the man who loved you? Is that your definition of alive, Clara? Because to me, it sounds like the actions of a predator, and you, his willing, eager accomplice." She flinched as if I had physically struck her. "That's not fair, Liam. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand, Clara. I said, my voice dropping back to a low, dangerous growl. I understand perfectly. I understand that you are a liar, a cheat, and a manipulator. I understand that you have no conscience, no loyalty, no regard for the pain you inflict on others. I understand that the woman I married, the woman I loved, was a figment of my imagination, a carefully constructed illusion designed to deceive and exploit. I leaned across the table, my face inches from hers, my eyes boring into hers, stripping away her last vestiges of defense. And I understand, Clara, that our marriage, this life we supposedly shared, is over. Irrevocably, completely, undeniably over. The finality of my words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Clara stared at me, her tear-streaked face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. The full impact of her actions, the true extent of the devastation she had wrought, seemed to be finally, belatedly, sinking in. No, Liam, please, she begged, her voice a broken whisper. Don't say that. We can fix this. I can fix this. I'll end it with Julian. I'll never see him again. I'll do anything to make this right. She reached across the table, her hand trembling, as if to touch mine, to bridge the abyss that now separated us. I recoiled as if from a leper. Fix this. I echoed, my voice incredulous. You think this can be fixed, Clara? After 18 months of lies, of betrayal, of calculated deceit? After you've conspired with another man to destroy me financially and emotionally? There is nothing left to fix, Clara. You have burned it all to the ground. There is nothing left but ashes and ruin. The cold, hard truth of my words seemed to finally penetrate her desperation. Her hand fell back to her lap, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The fight was gone, replaced by a desolate, hollow-eyed despair. What are you going to do? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm going to do what you should have had the decency, the courage, to do months ago, Clara, I said, my voice like ice. I'm going to end this charade. I've already consulted a lawyer. The divorce papers will be drawn up next week. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of panic. Divorce? Liam, no. Please, don't do this. We can go to therapy. We can work through this. I promise, I'll change. I'll do whatever it takes. It's too late for promises, Clara, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion save a profound, weary disgust. It's too late for therapy. It's too late for change. You had 18 months to choose a different path, to make a different decision. You chose betrayal. You chose deceit. Now, you will live with the consequences of those choices. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely unsteady, as if I had just run a marathon. The emotional toll of the confrontation was immense, but there was also a strange, perverse sense of release, of a burden finally, irrevocably, lifted. Your taxi will be here soon, Clara, I said, my voice flat. I suggest you take it. But not to the airport. Your romantic getaway with Julian Vance's, I'm afraid, canceled. I allowed myself a small, humorless smile. I took the liberty of informing the resort and the airline that your plans had changed. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in a flash of her old, familiar anger. You had no right. I had every right, Clara, I countered, my voice like steel. Just as I have every right to protect myself from further deception, further manipulation, further betrayal. I gestured towards the door. I want you out of this apartment. Tonight. Pack a bag, whatever you need for the immediate future. The rest of your belongings can be dealt with through our lawyers. Liam, you can't just throw me out, she cried, her voice rising in a desperate, panicked wail. Where will I go? What will I do? That, my dear Clara, I said, my voice utterly devoid of sympathy, is no longer my concern. You made your bed with Julian Vance. Perhaps he will be kind enough to offer you shelter. I paused, then added, with a chilling finality. Or perhaps, for the first time in a very long time, you will have to face the consequences of your actions alone. She stared at me, her face a crumpled mask of despair and dawning, terrified realization. The woman who had always had an answer, a manipulation, a way out, was finally, utterly, trapped. I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving her alone with the shattered pieces of her deceit, the damning evidence of her betrayal spread out before her like a funeral shroud. I didn't look back. As I closed the door to my study, I heard a low, keening wail from the dining room, the sound of a soul utterly broken, utterly defeated. There was no triumph in that sound, no satisfaction, only a profound, weary sadness. This was not how I had ever envisioned our marriage ending. But Clara had authored this tragedy, and I, her unwilling co-star, had simply brought the curtain down on her final, devastating performance. The storm had broken, and in its wake, there was only the cold, hard, undeniable reality of ruin. The hours that followed the confrontation were a strange, surreal landscape of muted chaos and profound, echoing silence. Clara did not emerge from the dining room for a long time. I heard muffled sobs, the occasional choked cry, the sounds of a woman grappling with the catastrophic implosion of her carefully constructed world. I remained in my study, the door closed, a barrier between the life I was determined to leave behind and the uncertain future that lay ahead. There was no satisfaction in her despair, no vindictive pleasure in her pain. Only a deep, weary sadness, a profound sense of loss for what might have been, for the love I had believed we shared. The anger, the rage, had largely dissipated, replaced by a chilling, almost surgical detachment. I had done what needed to be done. The truth had been spoken. The reckoning had been delivered. Sometime around midnight, I heard movement in the apartment. The scrape of a suitcase being dragged across the floor. The opening and closing of drawers. The rustle of clothing. Clara was packing, her movements furtive, almost ashamed. She didn't attempt to speak to me, didn't knock on my study door, didn't seek a final, desperate plea for reconciliation. Perhaps she finally understood the futility of it. Perhaps the weight of her betrayal, laid bare and undeniable, had finally crushed her spirit. Around 2 a.m., I heard the front door of the apartment open, then close with a soft, final click. She was gone. I waited for a few minutes, the silence in the apartment now absolute, almost deafening. Then, I slowly rose from my chair and walked out of the study. The dining room was empty, the damning documents still spread across the table, a stark testament to the drama that had unfolded. Her water glass was untouched. Mine was half empty. I walked through the apartment, a ghost in my own home. Her side of the bedroom closet was half empty, a few discarded hangers lying on the floor. Her dressing table was cleared of most of her personal effects, though a faint, lingering scent of her perfume still hung in the air, a cruel, olfactory reminder. The sense of finality was overwhelming. This was it. The end of an era. The end of Liam and Clara. The end of a life I had once believed would last forever. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the darkened living room, staring out at the glittering, indifferent lights of the city, my mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. There was grief, yes, a profound, aching sorrow for the loss of love, for the death of a dream. But there was also a strange, unexpected sense of liberation, of a crushing weight finally lifted. The uncertainty, the suspicion, the constant, gnawing dread that had consumed me for months, it was gone, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of truth. The path ahead was daunting, unknown. Divorce. The dismantling of a shared life. The rebuilding of a future I had never envisioned having to face alone. But as the first, faint streaks of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, a new, unfamiliar emotion began to stir within me, a fragile, tentative flicker of hope. Hope for a future free from lies, free from deceit, free from the suffocating weight of Clara's betrayal. Hope for a chance to heal, to rebuild, to perhaps, one day, find love again, a love built on honesty and trust, not on illusion and manipulation. The days that followed Clara's departure were a blur of logistics and emotional processing. The apartment, once a symbol of our shared life, now felt vast, empty, haunted by the ghosts of what used to be. Every room held a memory, every object a story, and each one was now tainted by the shadow of her betrayal. My first call was to Eleanor Vance, my lawyer. I recounted the details of the confrontation, Clara's departure, the current state of affairs. Eleanor listened patiently, her voice calm, professional, a reassuring anchor in the turbulent sea of my emotions. "You handled it well, Liam," she said, after I had finished. "Maintaining your composure, presenting the evidence clearly, that was crucial." Her emotional breakdown, her admissions of guilt, even if not formally recorded, will weigh heavily in her credibility or lack thereof. She outlined the next steps. Filing the divorce petition, serving Clara with the papers, beginning the process of asset division and financial disclosure. It all sounded so cold, so clinical, so utterly inadequate to address the profound, human tragedy that had unfolded. But I knew it was necessary, a painful but essential part of severing the ties that bound me to a past I needed to escape. Clara, I learned through a terse, almost hostile email from her newly acquired lawyer had taken refuge at a friend's apartment. She made no attempt to contact me directly, no further pleas for forgiveness, no attempts at reconciliation. It seemed the fight had gone out of her, replaced by a sullen, resentful acceptance of her fate. Or perhaps Julian Vance, her erstwhile lover and co-conspirator, had finally offered her the shelter she so desperately needed. I didn't know, and frankly, I didn't care. Her life, her choices, her future were no longer my concern. The process of disentangling our lives was painful, messy, and fraught with 1,000 small, agonizing decisions. Who would keep the apartment until it was sold? How would we divide our joint assets, our shared possessions, the detritus of a decade-long marriage? Each decision was a fresh reminder of what had been lost, each negotiation a potential new battleground. Eleanor handled most of it, shielding me from the worst of the acrimony, her professionalism a welcome buffer against the emotional rawness of the situation. But there were some things I had to face myself. One Saturday morning, I began the grim task of sorting through Clara's remaining belongings, packing them into boxes for her to collect. Each item, a dress she had worn on a special occasion, a book she had loved, a photograph of us from happier times, was a fresh stab to the heart. I worked methodically, ruthlessly, trying to detach myself emotionally, to treat it as a purely logistical exercise. But it was impossible. The ghosts of our past were everywhere, whispering reminders of love and laughter, of shared dreams and broken promises. I found the velvet box containing the diamond stud earrings and the gold bracelet, gifts from Vance, symbols of her betrayal. For a moment, I was tempted to hurl them against the wall, to smash them into 1,000 pieces. But I didn't. Instead, I placed them carefully in a separate box, along with a few other items I knew were not mine to keep, and labeled it clearly, Clara, personal effects, not joint. Let her reclaim these tokens of her illicit affair. They were a fitting testament to the woman she had become. The hardest part was dealing with the photographs, the visual record of our shared history. Wedding albums, vacation snapshots, candid moments of joy and intimacy, each one a poignant reminder of a love I had believed to be real. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away, not yet. But I couldn't bear to look at them either. I packed them all into a large, sturdy box, sealed it tightly, and stored it in the back of a closet, a time capsule of a life that no longer existed. Perhaps one day, years from now, I would be able to look at them again, not with pain, but with a detached, philosophical acceptance. But not now. Not yet. The weeks turned into months. The divorce proceedings crawled forward with a frustrating, bureaucratic slowness. Clara, through her lawyer, adopted a strategy of obstructed delay, contesting every point, quibbling over every asset, seemingly determined to make the process as painful and protracted as possible. Perhaps it was her way of exacting revenge, of punishing me for exposing her deceit. Or perhaps it was simply the desperate thrashing of a woman who had lost everything and was now clinging to whatever leverage, however petty, she could find. Eleanor remained a rock, calm, professional, and fiercely protective of my interests. This is typical behavior in high-conflict divorces, Liam, she assured me. She's trying to wear you down, to force you into a less favorable settlement out of sheer exhaustion. Don't let her. We have the evidence. We have the leverage. We will prevail. Her confidence was reassuring, but the process was emotionally draining. There were days when the anger, the bitterness, the sheer, overwhelming sense of injustice threatened to consume me. I would replay Clara's lies, her manipulations, her casual cruelties, over and over in my mind, fueling a rage that felt both righteous and corrosive. There were other days when the grief would wash over me, unexpected and overwhelming. A snatch of a song on the radio, a familiar scent, a chance encounter with a place we had once visited together. Anything could trigger a fresh wave of sorrow, a poignant reminder of the love I had lost, the future that had been stolen. I sought solace in work, throwing myself into my job with a renewed, almost obsessive focus. The logical demands of my profession, the clear-cut objectives, the tangible results, were a welcome antidote to the emotional chaos of my personal life. I worked long hours, took on extra projects, immersed myself in the minutiae of my tasks, anything to keep my mind from dwelling on the wreckage of my marriage. I also started seeing a therapist, a kind, insightful woman who helped me navigate the labyrinth of my grief and anger. She listened patiently as I poured out my pain, my confusion, my rage, offering not easy answers or glib platitudes, but a safe space to explore my emotions, to understand the trauma I had endured, and to begin the slow, arduous process of healing. You are grieving, Liam, she told me during one session. Grieving the loss of your wife, yes, but also the loss of the life you believed you had, the future you envisioned. And you are grieving the loss of your own innocence, your own trust. That is a profound, complex grief, and it will take time to process. She helped me understand that my anger was a natural, healthy response to the profound betrayal I had experienced. She encouraged me to acknowledge it, to express it in healthy ways, but not to let it consume me, not to allow it to define me. Clara's actions were her own, Liam, she said. They were a reflection of her character, her choices, not a judgment on your worth or your value as a person. You are not responsible for her betrayal. You are only responsible for how you choose to move forward. Her words were a lifeline, a beacon of clarity in the fog of my despair. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to disentangle my own identity, my own sense of self-worth, from the wreckage of my marriage. I was more than just Clara's husband, more than just the victim of her deceit. I was Liam Hayes, a man who had been wounded, yes, but not broken. A man who had survived, and who would, in time, heal. The divorce was finalized nearly a year after Clara's departure. It was a messy, acrimonious process, but in the end, thanks to Eleanor's tenacity and the irrefutable evidence contained in Thorne's report, the settlement was reasonably fair. The apartment was sold, the proceeds divided. Our joint assets were disentangled. The legal ties that had bound us together for a decade were finally, irrevocably, severed. Clara, I heard through the grapevine, had not fared well. Her affair with Julian Vance had, predictably, imploded shortly after our separation. Vance, it seemed, was not interested in a long-term commitment with a woman whose life was in such public, messy disarray. He had moved on, quickly and ruthlessly, to his next conquest, leaving Clara alone to face the consequences of her actions. Her career had suffered, her reputation tarnished. She was, by all accounts, a shadow of her former self, a woman adrift, her confidence shattered, her future uncertain. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, no schadenfreude in her suffering. Only a distant, muted sadness, a sense of a life tragically wasted, a potential squandered. She had made her choices, and she was now living with their inevitable, bitter fruit. As for me, the path to healing was long and arduous, but it was a path I was determined to walk. I continued with therapy, slowly, painstakingly, piecing together the shattered fragments of my life. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected during the years of my increasingly insular marriage. I rediscovered old hobbies, explored new interests, began to build a life that was solely, authentically, my own. There were good days and bad days. Days when the ghosts of the past still haunted me, when the anger and grief still threatened to overwhelm. But there were also days when I felt a flicker of hope, a sense of new beginnings, a tentative belief in the possibility of a future free from the shadows of betrayal. I moved into a smaller apartment in a different part of the city, a space that held no memories of Clara, no echoes of our shattered past. I filled it with things that brought me joy, books, music, art, creating a sanctuary that was uniquely, unapologetically, mine. One crisp autumn afternoon, nearly 2 years after Clara had walked out of my life, I found myself strolling through a local park, the fallen leaves crunching underfoot, the air alive with the scent of wood smoke and decaying foliage. I wasn't thinking about Clara, wasn't dwelling on the past. I was simply present, enjoying the warmth of the sun on my face, the beauty of the changing seasons, the quiet, simple pleasure of being alive. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I was healing. The wounds were still there, of course, scars that would likely remain for a lifetime. But they no longer defined me. They were a part of my story, yes, a testament to the battles I had fought, the pain I had endured. But they were not the whole story. The future was still uncertain, a blank canvas waiting to be filled. But for the first time in a very long time, I looked towards that future not with dread, but with a quiet, tentative optimism. I had survived the storm. I had navigated the labyrinth of grief and anger. And I had emerged, not unscathed, but stronger, wiser, and in a strange, unexpected way, more whole. The unmasking of Clara had been a brutal, devastating experience. But it had also been a liberation. It had freed me from a life built on lies, from a love that was an illusion. And it had given me the chance to build something new, something real, something true. The path ahead would not be easy. But as I walked on, the autumn sun warming my face, I knew with a certainty that resonated deep within my soul that I was ready to face it. I was ready to write the next chapter of my story, and this time I would be its sole, undisputed author.